You are a market leader operating in a highly competitive industry where efficiency and tangible results are paramount. You have a small and dedicated marketing team focused on executing regular marketing communications that must deliver immediate, measurable outcomes. You need a marketing partner that can seamlessly collaborate with your team, ensuring swift and frictionless execution, all while achieving quantifiable results in real time. My name is Tyler Chisholm, and as the co-founder and CEO of Clear Marketing, we can help. With over 15 years of work with clients exactly like you from across North America, we have the team, the skills, and the processes to deliver the marketing that matters to you. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or check out clearmotive.ca to learn more. Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to returning guest this morning, Mr. Dan Balaban. How are you, Dan?
Doing well. How are you, Tyler?
I'm really good. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming back on. It's been a while since we came on the show and your team reached out to me, and lots going on in the space that you play in. So let's start there a little bit, and then we'll see what this conversation, we've got a good one in store today. So you're the co-founder and CEO at Greengate. Let's just start there. Let's let everybody into the tent. Who do you do? Who are you? What do you do? What blows your hair back? And let's go from there.
So Greengate's a renewable energy development company. Basically what that means is we take an idea for a renewable energy project and we invest the time and dollars over several years to turn that idea into, a project that's operating, wind or solar. We've been doing it for 17 years. Our focus has been primarily on Alberta, and we've been fortunate to have developed some pretty phenomenal projects. We developed about 10 years ago what at the time was the largest wind farm in the country, and more recently we developed what is now the largest solar farm in the country by far. And I think we've proven that it truly is oil and gas and renewables, even here in the hard oil country.
What I heard was a high degree of inclusivity, not exclusivity or exclusionary talk. Let's just touch base. You and I chatted before about talking about the polarization, the divides, how vilified we always make the others kind of thing. Talk to me even about 17 years ago when you were talking about bringing these projects forward. Just curious how that journey has changed and what that narrative looks like now, which in a time where we should, I use the word should very deliberately, be more educated, be more aware. But I'm really curious what the process looks like 15 years ago versus the last 3 years.
So, renewables has actually been an industry that's been growing all over the world for decades. And Alberta was actually one of the first places in Canada to deploy, commercial scale wind energy, in the southern part of our province in Pincher Creek. So it's an industry that's been going on for a while, but 17 years ago when we started, it was a very small part of our energy mix. It was something that was seen as having a lot of potential, but there wasn't as much attention as there is put on it today. Fast forward today to today, we have gigawatts of billions of dollars of renewable energy projects that are now connected to our grid. There's a ton of capital all over the world that's looking to be deployed into this space. And the bar has moved very significantly in terms of where we're trying to get to from an environmental performance perspective, because now we're talking about net zero. Net zero was certainly not something we were talking about 17 years ago.
When it came to getting a project done, was there more of a curiosity and an openness? Was it, again, we're going to get into the fact that things seem to be so much more polarized. Was that the dialogue, or was it just less of because it wasn't such a big flagpole topic that it is today?
Yes, it didn't seem to be as polarized back then. It wasn't really on the radar as much as it is today. Right. I'd say generally in Alberta, we found, landowners to be quite receptive to hosting renewable energy projects on their land, appreciating the economic diversification opportunities that come along with it. But as it's become a more important part of our energy mix, and the bar has moved on the environmental performance targets, it's become a lot more polarized.
Talk to me, let's dive into it. Polarization in our society as a whole, I don't think anybody's listening going to go, no, what do you mean? We're not polarized. But just around the energy conversation, from your perspective, because you live and breathe this, is it lack of knowledge, aka ignorance? Is it fear, which goes really hand in hand with lack of knowledge and ignorance? What are some of the things, like very seldom do we all have any near close to the ability to understand there's such complex issues, but we jump to black or white or yes or no or for or against so easily. Is it simply a substance, the complexity of it, or also people just feeling threatened? Kind of what's yours? Again, this is where we get into the armchair point of view kind of perspective of the show really quickly. Talk to me a little bit about, like, in this context of energy, how has it become so binary, feeling like quickly, but I know it's slowly and then all of a sudden, right?
Yeah. So, I've been developing, renewable energy projects in the heart of oil country for more than 17 years now. We've been doing it successfully, and we pulled off some pretty amazing projects. But I think that's given me a bit of a unique perspective on the whole energy conversation. And I think what we're seeing happening in energy is the same thing we're seeing happening on most major issues globally today. And it plays out through the politics of division, where we're being presented an issue and being presented two potential choices. Both are extremes oftentimes on either side. And I find, particularly for complex issues, the solutions often lie in the middle.
The messy middle, as it's often referred to.
Exactly. And, I think the silent majority of people in the world really are kind of rational and think about it from the middle. But it's the extreme voices that seem to be getting the airtime today. So in the case of energy, it's being framed, I think, in a couple of ways. One, I think it's being framed as a choice between oil and gas or renewables, when I think it's an and. We can be developing our oil and gas and our renewable energy resources. The world needs a ton of energy. Our energy needs are growing. We also need to improve our environmental performance so we can address, climate change and the environmental issues that we're concerned about. But these things these changes take time. And, while we're going through the change, we need both sources of energy. And I think, politically, the way it's playing out in Canada is we have, the federal government, which has put out some very aggressive net zero targets. Specifically on electricity, they're trying to impose a net zero grid by 2035 for all the provinces. Alberta is pushing back really hard on that goal. And, there have been some political decisions which we can chat about that are not very helpful to ultimately get us to the destination that we want to be, which is a more sustainable, prosperous, future for all of Canada, including Alberta.
So can we start off, let's start with something we can agree on. Do we agree that we're going to blame the political arena for a lot of maybe some of this, what's going on, the AB, the red, blue, it always seems to be this AB choice prezzo, where in reality, there's a lot more options in the middle. Like it's, my business partner told me a story once, his 6-year-old daughter, it's like, she's like, okay, Brooklyn, it's time for bed. Do you want to brush your teeth or put on your pajamas? And she looked at him and said, Dad, I need more choices. I really appreciate the nuance of that, for brilliance in that question.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I feel that most of us are not far off. I feel like I need something more, but I'm only given this AB, and the political sphere does a really good job at trying to make you choose.
Yeah, I mean, politics is ultimately about getting votes and getting back into power. So certainly, I think political forces are recognizing that that's the way the world seems to be working, and stoking the fire, if you will, to a certain extent. But we also have ourselves to blame. And we can't just blame all these external forces.
Touche.
But I think a lot of it starts with ourselves. How we treat each other in conversations. Like it's totally fine to have a different point of view with somebody, but you can have a respectful debate. You don't have to yell at each other. You don't have to threaten each other. You don't have to, potentially intimidate each other, like we're seeing happen here on some issues. So respectful debate. I think a lot of it also has to do with social media, right? Social media is a tool that's hasn't existed for very long, and we're seeing the way it plays out is it tends to really promote polarized views. Like, how often are you engaging on content in social media because you're like, oh, that's so nice and happy? You're most of the time we're engaged based on our negative reactions to things, anger, fear, and that's the way things are playing out in politics too.
Yeah, it really taps into such our evolutionary like loss aversion of like, oh shit, is that a tiger? Should I be scared? What do I need to be fearful of? Like, it really taps into such deep rooted sense of who we are and how we function as humans. And the algorithm does such a good job at doing that at scale. And a friend told me years ago, he's like, hey, if you really want to game the system, go and like both sides. He goes, then all of a sudden Facebook at the time would then not know what to serve you, and you'd kind of get left alone to a certain extent. If you clicked on some polarizing left, some polarizing right, it's like, oh, we don't know where this person sits, so we don't know what to serve them to get more eyes on. And always remembering that there is a bit of a game being played, and we're more susceptible than we think. I do want to say that out loud. Like, we are very susceptible.
Absolutely. And, the thing is, we're often talking about some pretty serious issues, right? So, so here in Canada, energy is a really important issue because it dominates our economy in Alberta for sure. And it's an important part of our economy across the country. And, so to get into a little bit more detail, so what happened here in Alberta recently is, Alberta has been leading the country and one of the leading places in North America for renewable energy growth over the last 5 years or so. It's a surprising fact, right? Who would think the hard oil country would also be a renewable energy leader?
The problem with this information is it's not as widely known. Like you saying that, I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That headline does not get floated around as probably as much as it should have, in my opinion.
I agree. I mean, it's a tremendous success story, and I'm really proud.
It's a point of pride. I love. Yeah, give me the positive. I want to showcase that, but it doesn't track as well as probably what we're going to talk about next, which is something that recently happened in Alberta.
Yeah, exactly. So tremendous place for renewable energy investment, billions of dollars of projects that were built. Lots of companies that are had an interest or have an interest in coming here. Really great. But recently, the provincial government imposed a moratorium on new renewable energy development.
6-month moratorium, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's basically all projects get parked, nothing new gets put, no new shovels in the ground for a 6-month period. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for a 6-month period, they weren't approving any new projects, which is it's a very negative signal to send to investors, especially when you're, previously the leading jurisdiction in Canada, one of the leading places for investment. And then, it's a pretty drastic move in my view.
Business does not like volatility. Like just like the mechanics of, oh, we're going to put billions of dollars. Like these are big capital expense. Like these are not projects you just whip off in a couple of weeks. These are significant investments that you need to be able to feel secure for the long term to get the payout of these things, right? Like just the mechanics of this industry. Mm.
Yeah, uncertainty is an enemy of investment. That's for sure. So it introduced a lot of uncertainty. The moratorium has since been lifted, and there's some new rules that have been in place, which ultimately are going to result in slower growth of the renewable energy industry, and there's still some uncertainty remaining out of all of it. So we essentially killed our renewable energy boom. But if you take a step back and look at what, the dynamics, I think it's really symptomatic of a bigger issue. And it's really the politics of division playing out on energy. On one side, you have the federal government, which is, putting this net zero goal on the provinces, like I mentioned before. The other side, you have the province, which is pushing back on that. And the renewable energy industry is caught in the crossfire. That's the way I see it. And instead of us, looking at solutions to build out the new sources of energy that we need, because we have growing energy demands here in Alberta, driven by our growing population, growing economic activity, the electrification of buildings and transportation. And the new one, which I think not enough people are talking about, is electricity demand driven by data centers and AI.
I've recently been getting on my radar a little bit more, which are huge sponges for electricity, for power.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alberta is actually a great location to host these sorts of data centers because of our relatively stable geography, not a lot of natural disasters.
No earthquakes, not a lot of tornadoes, like all that stuff. From a fire being one of our kind of biggest natural disasters, that seems to be, we now have this fire cycle season, but compared to jurisdictions with more variability, that makes sense.
Yeah, so and relatively cool climate, so lower
easier
cost
to
for
keep,
that,
because those are huge heat generators as well. Those centers.
Exactly. So so Alberta is a great place. So we have all these growing demands for energy, and any policies that we put in that slow down the development of new energy generation sources, especially when it's private capital that's looking to invest. Without subsidies, I think that's another important thing to know is, the vast majority of renewables in Alberta have been built without subsidies. Anyways, I'm a little confused as to why we would be taking that approach if we're ultimately trying to find the solution. But if we're trying to rile people up for political reasons, I could say it's mission accomplished.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. So you get into reading about this is where you and I can really armchair prophesize. It's too early, but a scotch and maybe some booze would be, and a cigar would, where this would go. You read so much about polarization and individuals feeling, I'm overwhelmed, I don't have any sense of control, the world is bigger than what I can wrap my head around. So I tend to grab onto issues, or I tend to, if you look at the role that the federal government is playing and maybe going, hey, they're bullying us, they're forcing us, we're gonna go on a little 6-month hunger strike here. So it feels like also like this political football of like exerting control where maybe we feel like we don't have it. I'm over kind of dramatizing, even thinking about individuals I know of, some older friends, and they just feel so out of touch with what's going on. They are starting to grab onto, I would argue, some unhealthy beliefs in the sense of trying to bring meaning to the world around them. That feels a little bit kind of what you just described of like, okay, they'll throw this 6 month and we won't even, I'm sure there's why we did it, and sure there was some very valid reasons, but it feels like it was our only way to kind of exert some pushback against Ottawa, just for lack of better, which then, like you said, we've now got something that's much bigger than that becoming the political football.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's pretty disappointing that, we're kind of put in this confrontational approach between the province and Ottawa. I think I really wish there was more of a collaborative approach being taken from both sides, right? Like, I think it's important that we address our environmental challenges, and we move toward more sustainable sources of energy. But I also recognize that that's not something we can do overnight. And, particularly Alberta has unique challenges in getting to net zero. We have relatively a small amount of hydro resources. We have no nuclear. So, most of our energy today comes from burning natural gas or renewables. Right. And to simply replace the natural gas generation overnight or, in a matter of a few years, it's going to be very difficult to do. So I think the federal government needs to recognize Alberta's unique challenges in doing that and find a solution that, works for us. But I'm not getting the sense that that compromise is in the works or is getting much traction, right?
The rhetoric is going the other direction. It's entrenching and building bigger walls. 2035, just to play on that, like for a province like Alberta, that might not be realistic in any sense of the word. But I also realize that if you don't set aggressive goals, people don't pay attention to them either. Like it's a tricky balance. And I'm not certainly saying one is right and one is wrong, but we threw that out there. I've talked to a lot of experts, maybe even yourself on our last podcast. We're like, some of these numbers aren't actually realistic. They're just political plays. But at the same time, it's certainly getting a lot of attention on the subject. Like moonshots are there for a reason and they stimulate growth, but they also cause people to throw up their hands. Like, are we playing kind of a dangerous game with some of these political statements that aren't actually based on fact or reality for certain provinces, especially Alberta?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, this net zero by 2035 goal, the rhetoric coming out of the province has been, well, it's impossible. Well, I wouldn't say it's impossible. I would say it's extremely challenging. But I
But
think
if we got close to it, it would still be a win. Not like this binary thing is the problem with the moonshot. Oh, we got 70% of the way, but holy shit, look what we learned. But we can't get it, so I'm going to throw up my hands and take my ball and go home. Right? That's not a healthy attitude.
Yeah, I think it's great to have a goal, but it's important to have some reality in that goal as well.
Smart goals are built that way for a reason, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're chatting with somebody who's taken on some pretty big projects. When we took on the big solar project that we did, it's almost $1 billion solar project that's now operating.
I bet a lot of people told you were crazy at that point as well, Dan. I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
I'm guessing that's what happened.
Yeah, as time goes on, they tell me they still tell me I'm crazy, but it's okay. At least I accomplished stuff.
There's nothing more powerful than success, right? In that journey. But as that catalyzes out and then gets distilled into the everyday citizens, the you and me, or maybe the me more so, not as educated, you're closer to it. It just goes, well, it's still big. I don't understand it. That soundbite makes sense to me. I'm pro oil and gas, so therefore I'm for this. It's just such a binary way to go 1-2 there, where really you should have spent your whole day reading white papers to really understand it. But not many of us are going to do that. We're just not going to do it.
Yeah. So I think, I understand that. I think, again, it really comes down to us. I think we need to understand that, there are a number of issues that are very complex in this world. They can't be summarized in a soundbite, and as much as we want to rush to reaching a conclusion on something, we really need to try to keep an open mind and listen more instead of yelling at each other on various issues.
You made the point, though. There's the extremes that show up and they get the airtime and get the clicks and all the things. But if I sit around a dinner table with a group of mixed friends that might vote one way or different than there's still an ability for a dialogue. It's just not what seems to show up out there in the media. And like we've already talked about, that quote unquote doesn't sell newspapers, which I know is not the model, but it's just a new version of that in a way, right?
Yeah, well, maybe the model needs to change, right? Like, the media and social media, are a very important tool for our society, relied on, by many people. And I think there's a responsibility for that to operate in a way that is good for society, not just one that maximizes their profits at the expense of everything else, right? Like, if it's not helping us, it needs to change. And I really feel like this polarized narrative that's out there, on energy, on, various conflicts that are going on in the world today, is way too simplistic. It's creating tension and unrest. Even here in Canada, we're seeing that growing unrest, and that does not serve us. That is not a good direction for us to take. So I think we really need to evaluate, media, social media, how it operates, and ultimately, my plea would be to the folks running it is let's tune it more for love than for hate.
Oh, hate makes
change the algorithm.
Hate seems to make
tune the algorithm.
I know.
Yeah.
But if you want to go one layer, a couple layers deeper, there is that. It's amazing what distraction can do when you're not actually going, well, what actually is going on here? What about quality? Like, what about some of the issues that really do matter for you and your family while you're all riled up over here about something that's pushing your buttons? It is dangerous how it distracts us, right? Like sometimes I am like, oh, shiny, oh, squirrel. Like that happens again, back to our own challenges around our own cognition and how we get led around by the nose while quote unquote doing our research.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? Canada's a wonderful country, right? We have tremendous standard of living. We have people from all sorts of backgrounds that are living here, getting along generally for quite a long time, and I think we're starting to see glimpses of that being at risk with some of the growing, social unrest we're seeing here on a variety of topics. And I think we all need to ask ourselves, is that the direction we want to go? Or, do we value the peace that we have in this country, which, from my own personal background and family background is very, very important to me.
Mm-hmm. And that, I think you touched on something quite unique, and it's easy. There's, the last couple of years been lots of controversy around, people don't want to celebrate Canada Day because of some of the, history, the way we treat our Indigenous communities. There's some negativity in our past, there's no question, which we need to address and heal and move forward. But there also has been a level of inclusivity. Like, what is the Canadian value proposition, which I think is what you touched on, of like, no, you can come here and you can bring your religion with you and you can bring your beliefs with you, and that's okay. And we're gonna get along. And I don't want to sound too kumbaya, because I know that's not everyone's experience, but Canada on the world stage, I think, has often been recognized that way. And as a Canadian, I don't want to lose that. I think that is something that it's easy to take for granted until all of a sudden it's potentially gone or eroded quicker than you can catch it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, maybe I'll share a little bit, kind of my family background.
Sure,
so,
please.
So I'm the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors.
Oh, wow.
And I'm actually the first of my family to be born in North America. My grandparents went to great lengths to, ultimately get here and provide a, better life for their family. But, one of the things that I was taught is that, that Canada is a tremendous place, and that we should feel very fortunate to be here, but that we should never take the peace that we have here for granted, because things can change very quickly. And unfortunately, that was based on their real experience. So for me, it's something that's really important, and something that I keep my eye on. I try to be involved in initiatives, that do good in the world. That's one of the reasons why I got into the renewable energy industry. Obviously, I wanted to make money, but I wanted to have an impact, so in a positive way. So I care about these sorts of things, societal issues, and that's why I'm flagging it based on kind of my experience in a really polarized area.
I do really appreciate your never take the peace for granted. And it's so easy to become complacent. And it's funny, I remember I grew up in a small farming community south of Montreal, and there was a large family, a big farm operator that had immigrated from Germany after the war. And my dad was really good friends with the dad. And he's like, always be vigilant. Like, it was good until it wasn't good. And he was not on board with what certain parties in Germany at the time. And it was interesting to his view of the world of like, don't ever take this for granted. Very similar to, that's a narrative I just hadn't heard for a while. And he always would be like, oh, watch what, especially I grew up in Quebec, very polarizing political environment and separation. And I lived through a lot of that. I come out west and I talk about, they go, oh, it wasn't that bad and it wasn't us against them. I'm like, oh man, it was that day of the referendum back in 92, and thinking about some of that polarization that happened. And that was, people look at Quebec sometimes as its own place, but that's how quickly it can happen and how easily all of a sudden you're like, whoa, am I a minority? What's going to happen here? And then basic rights and freedoms, you're not so worried about other things anymore when you're worried about whether you can even go to the store and speak a language that was your own 5 minutes ago, that all of a sudden now becomes the second tier. It's interesting when you think about it, and that all happened inside our own country in the blink of an eye, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thanks for sharing that. I think that, just further highlights that we really can't take the wonderful life we have in Canada for granted. And I think, our political leaders need to try to turn down the temperature on, these highly tense issues that we're dealing with. But, again, it's really, really up to us, and recognize that even though we're just individuals, our actions have an impact. And maybe we can all be a little bit more thoughtful and try to turn down the temperature, individually as well.
Thoughts about, as individuals, absolutely. Talk about the business. I'm a firm believer that the business leaders in the business community has a huge opportunity, because yes, you said it. I like what you said earlier. Like, yeah, sure, I want to make money, but I also wanted something I could look back on and go, yeah, I made things better. I had a purpose. I did that. Talk to me about your thoughts. Like, I think business is an incredibly powerful lever in the dynamic, especially in the world that we live in, and the dynamics of capitalism. Business can be a real powerful change agent, and business leaders, I think, sometimes have more power than they realize.
Yeah, I mean, I ultimately believe that we're all here to make the world better in some way. There's different ways of doing that. You could do it as a teacher, an artist, a spiritual leader, a political leader, or a business podcaster. Business.
Thank you. Thanks for looping me in on that one.
you are changing the world, Tyler. But
one conversation at a time, Dan. One conversation at a time.
Exactly. This one, hopefully, in particular. But you can also do that as a business person, right? So in my case, I'm in the renewable energy industry. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is create more sustainable ways for us to produce our energy, so that human civilization is more sustainable. I think it's ultimately a force for good. But at the same time, we're a business, and we have to find a way to do it profitably. And business is competitive and tough, and you gotta grind through a lot of really difficult things to get there. But it's really around having a purpose that's beyond simply making a profit. It's making a profit while trying to do the right thing. It's not always an easy path, but I think it's certainly possible to do that in business. And I think business leaders have a responsibility to try to leave the world better than where it came, or than where it started from, than where we started. Mm-hmm. And there's more to it than just simply profit.
Totally. Do you still have confidence? You're still based in Alberta. Some of your biggest projects have been here in Alberta. Obviously, we've been through this. The move to renewables, and I just love the and versus the verse. It's not versus. It's so you're for this, you're against that. I'm like, no, that's a ridiculous. Like my buddy's daughter. No, I need more choices. This ridiculous concept. Do you still have faith and confidence that our current, government, or just our own climate, Canada, Alberta, like, what's your optimism? Like, getting back to the reality of the province that we live in, and none of us are on an island here, but we are in Alberta, and we've got a rock and roll, and people are moving here. There's a lot going on here, arguably in different ways than other parts of the country. What's your optimism meter look like right now?
Yeah, I mean, I remain optimistic about Canada and Alberta. First off, one of the best places in the world to live. Quality of life.
High five to that.
Second to none. We still are, relatively prosperous place. Not without its challenges, but compared to a lot of other places in the world, much better. We still have a fast-growing economy in all sorts of areas. I'm worried about the renewable energy industry specifically. We've been very active investors in renewables in Alberta for 17 years. Mm-hmm. Arguably, the top company in our space. But at the moment, we're not investing in any new renewable energy projects in Alberta. So okay. The moves have impacted us in this way, but there's lots of opportunity in Alberta that's not just in renewables. I'd love to see renewables continue to grow, but I remain optimistic. Hopefully, we can be making more rational political decisions going forward on both sides, the federal government and the provincial government, because if there's more of these shocks, maybe it has the potential to impact Alberta more broadly. But I think for now, there's still lots to be optimistic about.
I think sometimes also optimism is a choice. It's not blind. It's based on reality. But when you choose optimism, I tend to think you see the world in a different way as well. As we all put on our whatever colored glasses we put on that morning from a set of filters. So just to play around with it, because I'm curious, the ability to hold opposing ideas in your mind simultaneously is also a gift and a sign of intelligence, I've read. The moratorium, just to pick on it, what good came out of it in your mind?
Well, the moratorium was put in place because there was a number of renewables was growing really quickly in Alberta, and there were a number of issues that the provincial government wanted to review. So for example, impacts on pristine viewscapes that we have in the province.
Because that's one of the things they put in, right? Was this a certain distance from the mountains and such that came out of that?
Yeah. So agricultural land use. So, limitations on, putting renewables on really high value agricultural land, reclamation, making sure that there's appropriate funds in place for projects so that they can be reclaimed at the end of the project life. So these are all things that needed to be reviewed for a fast-growing industry. My problem has, I guess, two pieces. One is it didn't need a moratorium to review these things. These things could have been reviewed while the industry is continuing to go ahead. To say we're stopping something is a very extreme move, and I thought it was unnecessary. In the case
because to your point, all three of those sound like they make sense. Like no one's going to say that's a bad idea, but maybe the how they did it or the process that they used created like viewscapes, ag land, reclamation. Okay, all things I can get behind, but the process of how they executed on that is what you're really poking a stick at.
Yeah. You're stopping the industry while those things are going on is my problem. And then I guess the second thing is why only renewables? Why is the renewable energy industry the only industry that's being subjected to review of these sorts of things? So if you take viewscapes, for example, so maybe people don't want a wind turbine blocking their view of the mountains, and respect that. But there's no such rules on other things like gas plants, pump jacks,
I was going to say,
buildings, cell phone towers.
The pump jack landscape is real. I see. So feeling that something was unfortunately targeted also plays a part. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Exactly. I mean, I think energy is part of the Alberta landscape. I actually think it's quite beautiful to see, the harmony of nature and our energy generation and farming. It's kind of like the Alberta landscape, but
it is, which to your point is a very inclusive by its nature of of how it all works together, which is exactly what we're talking about. More inclusion, less binary.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so from the perspective of, the moratorium has come off, it slowed things down. Do you see momentum picking back up again? Because the move towards renewables, this conversation isn't going away. We're not like, oh, well, that was a cool fad, we're going to do something different now. Like, I don't think anybody thinks that, but is it irreparable damages, or was it an unfortunate hiccup in gameplay?
I guess, only time will tell. But my feeling is that it's not just going to bounce back to the way things were. I don't think it killed the renewable energy industry. I think the renewable energy industry in Alberta will continue to grow. But I think it killed the boom that we were seeing in the renewable energy industry. And how quickly we get back to realizing our full renewable energy potential. Yeah, I guess only time will tell. There's still some things that are still uncertain. Not everything has been sorted out in the various reviews the government's doing on the electricity market. So, there's still some work to do before we get back to a certain environment, which is really important for investment.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to be flippant, but it wouldn't be Alberta if we didn't have a boom and bust cycle. And if we don't have one, we seem to be able to create one. Sorry, that was a bit facetious. Like,
it's true.
So we forced a bust cycle, which is extreme to say that, but I'm like, man, I've lived here since 2000. I'm like, oh, this is just how we seem to do it here.
It is.
That was
funny.
A little, that was maybe not received well, but I just like, oh, okay, so we just did it to do it. Nuts and bolts, because I've got an expert on the line. I think it's January 15th. We all got the notification, power grid on the edge of failing, rolling brownouts kind of thing, because the wind wasn't blowing and the sun wasn't shining. I find that that's such an easy thing that people go, oh, well, look what happened. Look what happened. That's why we needed it. I'm like, again, feels pretty binary, but talk to me about just, again, I got an expert, so I don't want to miss the opportunity. That's being used as this flag or this pointing a flashlight at something going, see, look what was happening if we didn't put slow the brakes on, and more of that. Thoughts on that versus just that was an event and we need to balance everything out.
Yeah. Sorry, I got distracted for a second. Tyler, could you repeat that question?
No problem. January 15th, I think, was the date when we all got the warning on our phones about hey, the grid is going to fail, and the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, and we don't have enough power in the province. And I've seen that get floated around as like, oh, well, see, we had to put the brakes on things because look, things were going horribly, like we're getting into risk zone. From an expert who lives and breathes in this space, thoughts on that event and just the reality of how fragile this all is, but how imbalanced it needs to be to actually work for me, the citizen, on a Saturday night who's worried I can't make dinner now because the power's going to go out.
Yes, that was a really interesting period of time for us. So the characterization that it was because of wind and solar is simply not true. What ended up happening during that period of time is we had very cold weather, as you recall.
Minus 30 plus, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was even minus 40 plus, and lots of things fail under that sort of really extreme weather.
Myself included, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so natural gas plants failed, renewable energy facilities ended up not running. So we ended up being short power. The system in general ended up failing. And we had a period of time where we're short energy. Mm-hmm. What that really points out is we need more sources of energy in our system and a more diverse mix of energy in our system rather than less. Really another interesting thing is the idea of kind of demand response. So it's really interesting is that, that alert that went out told people that they needed to kind of turn off the lights, turn down things, and it actually helped avert the alert. So
which kind of shows me how wasteful we were being 5 minutes prior.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's circle this all the way back to the beginning of the call when you said there's a lot of opportunity for personal responsibility in all these things, including your own power consumption and the impact.
Yeah, absolutely. But, again, another example that was presented in a very adversarial manner, pointing the finger at one thing, which was not true. It wasn't renewables, wasn't solar and wind not producing. That was the only reason. It was a bunch of different things that failed under, the extreme stress of cold temperatures. So, again, that messaging wasn't helpful because it doesn't present the truth.
My friend was at an event, I think it was a Rotary event, where they had like one of the senior guys at one of the power companies explain it, which was much more, here's what happened, here's the situation, here's the culmination of events. Then I heard a political leader speak about it. I'm like, whoa, that was completely two different stories. I just heard one, an engineer that here's the facts and laid it out much more in the way that you just did and talked about all the things that contributed. Then I heard a political figure do it. And that was a very, very different storyline that came out. But if I only heard one and not the other, it would be pretty easy to jump on the anti-bandwagon to our earlier conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I'm hearing, Dan, is we need to take on the responsibility and find the time to maybe in this busy world we are in, that before we jump on a bandwagon, let's take some more time and look and force ourselves to look at perspectives that maybe don't align with our own. I don't even want to say do more research, because you can keep reading the same rhetoric over and over again and think you're doing research. Go and look at the opposing viewpoints and then really try to take stock, which is easier said than done, maybe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Have an open mind, maybe do more listening as well as talking, and certainly more listening and less yelling. That's for sure.
2 ears, 1 mouth, right? As my grandmother used to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can figure out actual solutions to our problems instead of fighting, because while we're fighting, we're not actually finding the solution.
Yes, I think my mom, I'm having all kinds of flashbacks. My mom, make sure, what is it? Before you shoot your mouth off, make sure your brains are loaded. I think it was one my mom shared with me when I was younger, multiple times maybe. They seem so surprisingly relevant right now in this conversation that we're having. You know what? Hey, sometimes your grandmother, she was right. Just have to go back and go, oh yeah. No, I guess she wasn't right off that. She wasn't off the mark at all. Dan, I appreciate coming on. That was a fun conversation from a broader dialogue of a very, very complex subject around our society and polarity, but also on top of the energy landscape. And if I was going to take a theme away, it's the word and, not either or for or against, but and. Hey, I'm really curious. And here's my point. That's such a different than, throwing a but or a not or a this or a that inside of a sentence. It just leaves you so much more open to be curious and maybe not so judgmental.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way of putting things. In the case of energy, it's oil and gas and renewables. It's not a choice of one or the other. We can be doing both, and complex issues require complex solutions, and the solutions are almost always in the middle. They're not the extreme. So it starts with us.
100%. Dan, if someone wants to get in contact, I think we've chatted before. LinkedIn. I see you're on LinkedIn. You got lots of activity on there. Is that a good channel if someone wants to reach out?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Dan Balaban on LinkedIn. GreengatePower.com. is the website of our company. And really enjoyed chatting with you, Tyler.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. This is our second. So once you get 2, 3, or 4 is in the mix already. So I look forward, because this is an unfolding storyline in Alberta. So I look forward to chatting again.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Tyler.